Okay, so we're in Bihar, and it's Tuesday, April 8th, 2025. Things are definitely heating up as we get closer to the assembly elections later this year. So it's a state, just imagine a state with such a rich history, but where everyone's attention is really on this really intense political drama
Yeah.
that's unfolding. And for you, the listener, we're going to cut through all the noise and really zoom in on what we think is a really crucial development that's, something you just can't ignore.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We need to kind of step back from the day-to-day news and really think about what matters. And I think what's really significant is that we have Tejashwi Yadav, the leader of the RJD, making it very clear that he wants to be the next chief minister and he wants to lead the Mahagathbandhan to victory. So it's not just, another candidate entering the race. This is a big moment. And the setting where he made this announcement, I think that tells a whole story in itself.
Yeah, you're spot on. It's really interesting that he chose the Musahar-Bhuiya Maharally in Patna to make this announcement. This wasn't just, a random political rally. The fact that it was specifically aimed at the Musahar-Bhuiya communities really gives us a glimpse into his strategy and the voters he's trying to connect with. It kind of immediately brings the whole announcement down to earth and into the very real social dynamics of Bihar.
Exactly. And the choice of that particular venue and that audience, that was not an accident.
Yes.
So at this rally, he unveiled this big promise, the Mai-Behan Samman Yojna. It sounds ambitious, but I think at its core, it's really about addressing, the difficulties and the economic struggles that a lot of people in Bihar are facing. So he's talking about giving real concrete support like cash housing, help with housing and jobs. And it's specifically targeted at those who are, most economically vulnerable. And I think this is a really smart move. The Musahar and Bhuiya communities have, historically been among the most marginalized in Bihar. And these kinds of direct appeals with very concrete promises, they can be really effective in mobilizing support and getting people to vote. We've seen this kind of strategy work before, where directly addressing the needs of particular communities can pay off big time politically.
And he didn't just kind of speak in general terms. He made a really specific commitment. If he becomes chief minister, his priority is going to be making sure that every poor family in Bihar has a puka house and a steady paycheck.
Yeah.
It's a pretty powerful image, right? And it's a promise that speaks directly to some of the most basic needs that people in this state have. And what we understand is that the crowd's reaction was super positive, even described as that feeling of contentment, like having litti choka on a cold winter evening, which, for anyone who knows Bihar, that's a pretty strong analogy.
Yeah, that's such a great comparison, isn't it? It's like this image of comfort and satisfaction. But beyond these promises, what I find really interesting is how Tejashwi is positioning himself compared to the current chief minister, Nitish Kumar.
Yeah.
He made the sharp contrast saying, I might be younger than Nitish, but I actually get things done. And it's a pretty bold move, right? It's directly questioning Nitish Kumar's effectiveness after all his years in power. It's the classic politics, youth and energy versus, the old guard.
For sure, it's all about presenting himself as someone who can actually bring about change. And to really back up this idea of him being someone who delivers. He pointed to his time as deputy chief minister in the previous Mahagathbandhan government and said, I was the one who got 5 lakh jobs created. He even said that the recruitment drives from back then are still going on. So he's trying to paint a picture of himself as someone who takes action and gets results.
And that number 5 lakh jobs, that's going to be a major point of contention. It's a huge number in a state where unemployment is high, and it allows him to say, hey, look, I achieved something tangible. But, we know that these kinds of claims, they always get scrutinized pretty heavily. So what kind of scrutiny are we expecting?
Yeah, typically there are always arguments about how those job figures are actually calculated, right? The types of jobs that were created and whether those jobs will actually last. So his opponents are definitely going to be looking to pick those numbers apart and challenge them. But even just mentioning such a large number, it can have a real impact on voters.
Absolutely. So it's not just about contrasting himself in terms of actions. He also had some pretty harsh words for Nitish Kumar's 20 years in power. He used this image of a khatara vehicle, something that's old and broken down and useless. He even painted this picture of a rusty old Jeep being towed away. It's a very striking image, almost theatrical.
Yeah, it's really effective in making people think of something outdated and worn out. So by calling Nitish Kumar's governance khatara, he's basically saying it's incapable of moving Bihar forward. His call to remove this khatara government and let Bihar rise. It's a simple message, but it's powerful.
It taps into this idea that people might be tired of the same leadership after 20 years. And then he takes it a step further and goes after the central government as well. It's something you see a lot in regional politics, this idea that the central government only cares about the state when it's time for elections.
Right, and he specifically went after Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his ministers, calling them fair-weather friends. It's pretty common accusation in regional politics that the national leaders only show up when they need votes.
Exactly, but what's really significant here is the specific accusation he leveled against the BJP. He said they're scheming to strip away the rights of Dalits and backward classes by maybe even rewriting the constitution and getting rid of reservations, and this is a big deal. Bihar had this long and complicated history with social justice movements that are all about caste-based reservations. So these policies are deeply ingrained in the state's politics. Any threat to them is a really sensitive issue. So to say that these hard-won rights are in danger, that's a serious allegation. Even though the reports we have don't point to any concrete evidence of such plans, it's still a powerful way to rally his base and make people feel like they're under threat.
Absolutely. The issue of reservations is like a live wire in Bihar's politics, bringing up the possibility of those rights being taken away. That's a high-stakes move. And, this announcement from Tejashwi comes right on the heels of Rahul Gandhi's visit to Patna just the day before, so it feels like a coordinated effort.
Right. It does. So Rahul Gandhi's visit and his message to Congress workers that they absolutely have to be united within the Mahagathbandhan, which includes the Congress, the RJD, and the left parties to take on the NDA, that really set the stage for this. And he basically said, look, the math is simple. In Bihar, alliances are way more successful than individual parties trying to go it alone. So his call for the Mahagathbandhan to be a united front seems to have directly led to Tejashwi's announcement. It makes it look like the opposition is organized and ready to challenge the ruling coalition.
It does. And the timing is interesting, isn't it? Okay, so let's dive a little deeper into this Mai-Behan Samman Yojna. It seems like this is a major part of Tejashwi's campaign. And as we've said, it promises direct financial help to women from low-income families. But it's more than just giving out cash, right?
Yeah, it is. So the Yojna, it also includes the promise of building solid brick houses and providing job opportunities for young people. So it's like a multi-pronged approach, trying to tackle different aspects of poverty and appeal to a wider range of voters. And, it's worth noting that similar programs that give cash for votes, they've had mixed results in other states like Jharkhand and Madhya Pradesh. They can give people some immediate relief and gain support, but there's a lot of debate about whether they actually help with economic development in the long run.
Right. So there's some precedent, but it's not clear-cut. And it's interesting how Tejashwi specifically addressed the Musahar-Bhuiya communities at the rally, promising to give them land and homes if he wins this very targeted approach to historically marginalized groups. Could really change things up, by speaking directly to the needs and aspirations of these communities. He's trying to build a strong and loyal base of support, the promise of land and housing, especially for people who have traditionally been landless and living in really difficult conditions that can be incredibly powerful and deeply resonant.
It is. And now let's go back to Nitish Kumar. He's been a major figure in Bihar politics for almost 2 decades, and he's known for focusing on development. So how does Tejashwi try to challenge this established image?
Well, it seems like Tejashwi's strategy is all about saying, look, Nitish Kumar has been in power for too long. He's maybe lost the energy and the fresh ideas to really deal with Bihar's challenges. So he's contrasting Nitish Kumar's long time in office with his own youthfulness and this promise of a new perspective. And crucially, he's saying, I've already shown that I can deliver on my promises.
And we can't forget Nitish Kumar's history of switching sides politically, right? He's been with the BJP, then he was with the RJD in the previous Mahagathbandhan, and now he's back with the BJP, and Tejashwi has been very clear that he's done with Nitish Kumar. He's not open to any kind of alliance with him in the future. That seems like a clean break, right?
It shuts down any possibility of negotiating after the election, and it reinforces this idea of a complete departure from the past. So it does seem pretty definitive.
Okay, so now we have to think about how the BJP is going to respond to Tejashwi's very strong campaign launch. And, we can probably expect them to really play up the development project that happened during Nitish Kumar's time, especially the ones that are backed by the central government. They'll also probably focus on law and order, which they often present as their strength. And of course, they'll use Prime Minister Modi's popularity to their advantage. We can also expect them to strongly deny Tejashwi's claims that they've neglected Bihar after the elections. They'll likely come out with data on financial aid and projects from the central government. And when it comes to those accusations about ending reservations, the BJP will almost certainly say it's just fear-mongering, and they'll point to their own support for quotas in the past to reassure their voters in those communities.
Right, so it's looking like a pretty direct and maybe even a pretty heated election battle.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about the Mahagathbandhan itself. They did really well in the 2020 elections. So how united are they now under Tejashwi's leadership?
Well, in 2020, even though they didn't get a majority, the Mahagathbandhan showed that they were a real force to be reckoned with. And this time, at least publicly, the RJD, the Congress, and the left parties are all saying that they're committed to staying together and backing Tejashwi as their chief ministerial candidate. We've heard statements from RJD spokespeople confirming Tejashwi's leadership, and that reinforces this message of unity.
Okay, so that public show of unity is definitely important, but we know that keeping a multi-party alliance together can be tough, especially when each party has its own goals and interests. The Congress Party, for example, they've had some pretty big electoral setbacks in Bihar in recent years.
That's true, and the Congress's track record does raise questions about whether they can really help the Mahagathbandhan win more seats. Rahul Gandhi's emphasis on unity, it kind of acknowledges that and underlines how crucial it is for all the parties in the alliance to do well and work together smoothly if they want to beat the NDA.
Okay, so let's zoom out a bit. Why should all this political stuff in Bihar matter to someone who doesn't live there? What's the bigger picture here?
Well, Bihar has a lot of seats in the assembly, 243 to be exact. So what happens in Bihar's elections, it can often give you a good idea of what's happening in national politics and how voters are feeling across the country. If the Mahagathbandhan does really well, it could energize opposition parties all over India and maybe even pose a challenge to the NDA, which seems pretty strong right now. On the other hand, if the NDA wins, it'll strengthen their hold on power, and that could influence their national strategies going forward.
Right, so it's not just a local election.
Yeah.
It has the potential to impact the whole country. And looking ahead, the elections are expected around October or November 2025.
Yeah.
But it seems like the campaign is already going full speed ahead.
Oh, absolutely. Tejashwi's rally and him clearly stating that he's running for chief minister, that's really kicked things into high gear. We can expect to see a lot of political activity in the coming months, more rallies, more promises, and of course, lots of criticism and back and forth arguments. And, as you said, there are other things that could come into play, like how well the left parties do within the alliance. And then there are wild cards like Prashant Kishore's Jan Swaraj party, which could make things even more complicated.
Right. So to wrap things up for today, it really seems like Tejashwi Yadav has made a big move, right? He's put himself in the spotlight. And someone said it really well. I think that he's belting out a tune Bihar can't ignore. I think that's a great way to put it.
It is. And the big question now, the thing for you, the listener, to think about is, will this momentum actually lead to him winning the election, or will it just fade away? Bihar's politics are unpredictable and complex. It's a fascinating story that's unfolding, and we encourage you to keep following what happens in Bihar in the coming months, because the results of these elections, they could have consequences that reach far beyond the state itself. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive today.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks everyone.